Ashat Audio presents The Family Corleone, based on a screenplay by Mario Puzo, written by Ed Falco, read by Bobby Cannavale.
For my father and his family, his 6 brothers and 2 sisters, the Falcos of Ainsley Street, Brooklyn, New York, and for my mother and her family, the Catapanos and Espositos from the same neighborhood, all of whom, the children of Italian immigrants, made good and decent lives for themselves and their families and their children and their children's children, among whom are doctors, lawyers, teachers, athletes, artists, and just about everything else. And for our neighborhood's family doctor in the 40s and 50s, Pat Francesi, who came to our houses when we were sick and took care of us, often for free or for whatever little might be offered, with love and every good wish and great respect. And for our neighborhood's family doctor in the 40s and 50s, Pat Francesi, who came to our houses when we were sick and took care of us, often for free or for whatever little might be offered, with love and every good wish and great respect. And every good wish and great respect. Book 1, Mostro. Fall 1933. 1. Giuseppe Mariposa waited at the window with his hands on his hips and his eyes on the Empire State Building. To see the top of the building, the needle-like antenna piercing a pale blue sky, he leaned into the window frame and pressed his face against the glass. He had watched the building go up from the ground, and he liked to tell the boys how he'd been one of the last men to have dinner at the old Waldorf Astoria, that magnificent hotel that once stood where the world's tallest building now loomed. He stepped back from the window and brushed dust from his suit jacket. Below him, on the street, a big man in work clothes sat atop a junk cart traveling lazily toward the corner. He carried a black derby riding on his knee as he jangled his set of worn leather reins over the flank of his swayback horse. Giuseppe watched the wagon roll by. When it turned the corner, he took his hat from the window ledge, held it to his heart, and looked at his reflection in a pane of glass. His hair was white now, but still thick and full, and he brushed it back with the palm of his hand. He adjusted the knot and straightened his tie where it had bunched up slightly as it disappeared into his vest. In a shadowy corner of the empty apartment behind him, Jake LeConte tried to speak, but all Giuseppe heard was a guttural mumbling. When he turned around, Tomasino came through the apartment door and lumbered into the room carrying a brown paper bag. His hair was unkempt as always, though Giuseppe had told him 100 times to keep it combed, and he needed a shave as always. Everything about Tomasino was messy. Giuseppe fixed him with a look of contempt that Tomasino, as usual, didn't notice. His tie was loose, his shirt collar unbuttoned, and he had blood on his wrinkled jacket. Tufts of curly black hair stuck out from his open collar. "You say anything?" Tomasino pulled a bottle of scotch out of the paper bag, unscrewed the cap, and took a swig. Giuseppe looked at his wristwatch. It was 8:30 in the morning. "Does he look like he can say anything, Tommy?" Jake's face was battered. His jaw dangled toward his chest. Tomasino said, "I didn't mean to break his jaw." "Give him a drink," Giuseppe said. "See if that helps." Jake was sprawled out with his torso propped up against the wall and his legs twisted under him. Tommy had pulled him out of his hotel room at 6 in the morning, and he still had on the black and white striped silk pajamas he had worn to bed the night before. Only now, the top 2 buttons had been ripped away to reveal the muscular chest of a man in his 30s, about half Giuseppe's age. As Tommy knelt to Jake and lifted him slightly, positioning his head so that he could pour scotch down his throat, Giuseppe watched with interest and waited to see if the liquor would help. He had sent Tommy down to the car for the scotch after Jake had passed out. The kid coughed, sending a spattering of blood down his chest. He squinted through swollen eyes and said something that would have been impossible to make out had he not been saying the same 3 words over and over throughout the beating. "He's my father," he said, though it came out as, "My father." "Yeah, we know." Tommy looked to Giuseppe. "You gotta give it to him," he said. "The kid's loyal." Giuseppe knelt beside Tomasino. "Jake," he said. "Giacomo. I'll find him anyway." He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and used it to keep his hands from getting bloody as he turned the kid's face to look at him. "Your old man," he said. "Rosario's day has come. There's nothing you can do. Rosario, his day is over. You understand me, Jake?" "Si," Giacomo said, the single syllable coming out clearly. "Good," Giuseppe said. "Where is he? Where's the son of a bitch hiding?" Giacomo tried to move his right arm, which was broken, and groaned at the pain. Tommy yelled, "Tell us where he is, Jake. What the hell's wrong with you?" Giacomo tried to open his eyes as if straining to see who was yelling at him. "My father," he said. "Che cazzo?" Giuseppe threw up his hands. He watched Jake and listened to his strained breathing. The shouts of children playing came up loud from the street and then faded. He looked to Tomasino before he exited the apartment. In the hall, he waited at the door until he heard the muffled report of a silencer, a sound like a hammer striking wood. When Tommy joined him, Giuseppe said, "Are you sure you finished him?" He put on his hat and fixed it the way he liked, with the brim down. "What do you think, Joe?" Tommy asked. "I don't know what I'm doing." When Giuseppe didn't answer, he rolled his eyes. "The top of his head's gone. His brains are all over the floor." At the stairwell, atop the single flight of steps down to the street, just two. Sonny settled into the front seat of a truck and tilted the brim of his fedora down. It wasn't his truck, but there was no one around to ask questions. At 2 in the morning, this stretch of 11th Avenue was quiet except for an occasional drunk stumbling along the wide sidewalk. There'd be a beat cop along at some point, but Sonny figured he'd slink down in the seat, and even if the cop noticed him, which was unlikely, he'd peg him for some mug sleeping off a drunk on a Saturday night, which wouldn't be all that far from the truth since he'd been drinking hard. But he wasn't drunk. He was a big guy, already 6 foot tall at 17, brawny and big-shouldered, and he didn't get drunk easily. He rolled down the side window and let a crisp fall breeze off the Hudson help keep him awake. He was tired, and as soon as he relaxed behind the wide circle of the truck's steering wheel, sleep started to creep up on him. An hour earlier, he'd been at Juke's Joint in Harlem with Cork and Nico. An hour before that, he'd been at a speakeasy someplace in Midtown, where Cork had taken him after they'd lost almost $100 between them playing poker with a bunch of Poles over in Greenpoint. They'd all laughed when Cork said he and Sonny should leave while they still had the shirts on their backs. Sonny'd laughed too, though a second earlier he was on the verge of calling the biggest Polak at the table a miserable son of a bitch cheater. Cork had a way of reading Sonny, and he'd gotten him out of there before he did something stupid. By the time he wound up at Juke's, if he wasn't soused, he was getting close to it. After a little dancing and some more drinking, he'd had enough for one night and was on his way home when a friend of Cork's stopped him at the door and told him about Tom. He'd almost punched the kid before he caught himself and slipped him a few bucks instead. Kid gave him the address, and now he was slumped down in some worn-out truck, looked like it dated back to the Great War, watching shadows play over Kelly O'Rourke's curtains. Inside the apartment, Tom went about getting dressed, while Kelly paced the room holding a sheet pinned to her breasts. The sheet looped under one breast and dragged along the floor beside her. She was a graceless girl with a dramatically beautiful face. Flawless skin, red lips, and blue-green eyes framed by swirls of bright red hair. And there was something dramatic, too, in the way she moved about the room, as if she were acting in a scene from a movie and imagining Tom as Cary Grant or Randolph Scott. "But why do you have to go?" she asked yet again. With her free hand, she held her forehead as if she were taking her own temperature. "It's the middle of the night, Tom. Why do you want to be running out on a girl?" Tom slipped into his undershirt. The bed he had just gotten out of was more a cot than a bed, and the floor around it was cluttered with magazines, mostly copies of the Saturday Evening Post and Grand, An American Girl. At his feet, Gloria Swanson looked up at him alluringly from the cover of an old issue of the new movie. "Dull," he said. "Don't call me dull," Kelly shot back. "Everybody calls me dull." She leaned against the wall beside the window and let the sheet drop. She posed for him, cocking her hips slightly. "Why don't you want to stay with me, Tom? You're a man, aren't you?" Tom put on his shirt and began buttoning it while he stared at Kelly. There was something electric and anxious in her eyes that bordered on skittishness, as if she was expecting something startling to happen at any moment. "You might be the most beautiful girl I've ever seen," he said. "You've never been with a better looker than me." "Never been with a girl more beautiful than you," Tom said. "Not at all." The anxiousness disappeared from Kelly's eyes. "Spend the night with me, Tom," she said. "Don't go." Tom sat on the edge of Kelly's bed, thought about it, and then put on his shoes. Sonny watched the light from a cast-iron lamppost shine off the parallel lines of railroad tracks dividing the street. He let his hand rest on the 8-ball screwed atop the truck's stick shift and remembered sitting on the sidewalk as a kid and watching freight trains rumble down 11th, a New York City cop on horseback leading the way to keep drunks and little kids from getting run down. Once he'd seen a man in a fancy suit standing atop one of the freights. He'd waved, and the man scowled and spit, as if the sight of Sonny disgusted him. When he asked his mother why the man had acted that way, she raised her hand and said, "Statazit, some cafon spits on the sidewalk and you ask me, Maron." She walked away angrily, which was her typical response to most questions Sonny asked as a kid. It seemed to him then that her every sentence started with Statazit, or Vanapoli, or Maron. Inside the apartment, he was a pest, a nudge, or a scooch. And so he spent all the time he could outside, running the streets with neighborhood kids. Being in Hell's Kitchen, looking across the avenue to a line of shops at street level and across the avenue in Kelly O'Rourke's apartment over a barber shop behind the familiar black latticework of fire escapes, a figure brushed against the curtain, parting it slightly so that Sonny could see a strip of bright light and a white-pink flash of skin and a shock of red hair. And then it was as if he were in two places at once. 17-year-old Sonny looked up to the curtained second-floor window of Kelly O'Rourke's apartment, while simultaneously, 11-year-old Sonny was on a fire escape, looking down through a window and into the back room of Murphy's bar. His memory of that night at Murphy's was vivid in places. It hadn't been late, maybe 9:30, 10 o'clock at the latest. He'd just gotten into bed when he heard his father and mother exchange words. Not loud. Mama never raised her voice to Pop. And Sonny couldn't make out the words, but a tone unmistakable to a kid. A tone that said his mother was upset or worried. And then the door opening and closing, and the sound of Pop's footsteps on the stairs. Back then, there was no one posted at the front door. No one waiting in the big Packard or the black 8-cylinder Essex to take Pop wherever he wanted to go. That night, Sonny watched from his window as his father went out the front door and down the front steps and headed toward 11th. Sonny was dressed and flying down the fire escape to the street by the time his father turned the corner and disappeared. He was several blocks from his home before he bothered to ask himself what he was doing. If his father caught him, he'd give him a good beating, and why not? He was out on the street when he was supposed to be in bed. The worries slowed him down, and he almost turned around and headed back. But his curiosity got the better of him, and he pulled the brim of his wool cap down almost to his nose and continued to follow his father, leaping in and out of shadows and keeping a full block between them. When they crossed over into the neighborhoods where the Irish kids lived, Sonny's level of concern ticked up several notches. He wasn't allowed to play in these neighborhoods, and he wouldn't have even if he were allowed, because he knew Italian kids got beat up here, and he'd heard stories of kids who'd wandered into the Irish neighborhoods and disappeared for weeks before they turned up floating in the Hudson. A block ahead of him, his father walked quickly, his hands in his pockets and the collar of his jacket turned up against a cold wind blowing in off the river. Sonny followed until they were almost to the piers, and there he saw his father stop under a striped awning in front of a freestanding sign for Murphy's Bar and Grill. Sonny ducked into a storefront and waited. When his father went into the bar, the sound of laughter and men singing rushed out onto the street, and then hushed when the door closed, though Sonny could still hear it, only muted. He crossed the street, moving from shadow to shadow, storefront to storefront, until he was directly across from Murphy's, where he could see through a narrow window the dark figures of men hunched over a bar. With his father out of sight, Sonny crouched in a shadow and waited. But after only a second, he was moving again, tearing across a cobblestone street and down a garbage-strewn alley. He couldn't have told you precisely what he was thinking beyond that there might be a back entrance and maybe he'd see something there. And indeed, when he came around behind the back of Murphy's, he found a closed door with a curtained window beside it and yellowish light shining out to the alleyway. He couldn't see anything through the window, so he climbed onto a heavy metal garbage pail on the other side of the alley, and from there, he leapt to the bottom rung of a fire escape ladder. A moment after that, he was lying on his stomach and looking down through a space between the top of the window and a curtain into the back room of Murphy's Bar. The room was crowded with wooden crates and cardboard cartons, and his father was standing with his hands in his pockets and speaking calmly to a man who appeared to be tied to a straight-back chair. Sonny knew the man in the chair. He'd seen him around the neighborhood with his wife and kids. The man's hands were out of sight behind the chair, where Sonny imagined they were tied. Around his waist and chest, clotheslines cord dug into a rumpled yellow jacket. His lip bled and his head lolled and drooped as if he might be drunk or sleepy. In front of him, Sonny's uncle, Peter, sat on a stack of wood crates and scowled, while his Uncle Sal stood with arms crossed, looking solemn. Uncle Sal looking solemn was nothing. That was the way he usually looked. But Uncle Peter scowling was something different. Sonny knew him all his life as a man with a ready smile and a funny story. He watched from his perch, fascinated now, finding his father and his uncles in the back room of a bar with a man from the room was brightly lit by a bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling, its beaded metal pull chain dangling over Clemenza's head. Beyond the bolted wood door to the bar, men's loud voices sang and laughed. Vito turned to the man and said, "You're not being reasonable, Henry. I've had to ask Clemenza as a favor to me not to break your legs." Before Vito could say anything more, Henry interrupted. "I don't owe you wops a thing," he said. "You dago pricks." Even drunk, his words were clear and full of that musical lilt common to the Irish. "You can all go back to your beloved fucking Sicily," he said, "and fuck your beloved fucking Sicilian mothers." Clemenza took a step back. He looked surprised more than angry. Tessio said, "Vito, this son of a bitch is hopeless." Clemenza picked up the crowbar again, and again Vito raised his hand. This time Clemenza sputtered and then, looking at the ceiling, issued a long string of curses in Italian. Vito waited until he was finished, and then waited longer until Clemenza finally looked at him. He held Clemenza's gaze in silence before he turned back to Henry. On the fire escape, Sonny pulled his hands close in to his chest and tightened his body against the cold. The wind had picked up and it was threatening to rain. The long, low howl of a boat horn floated off the river and over the streets. Sonny's father was a man of medium stature, but powerfully built, with muscular arms and shoulders from his days working in the railroad yards. Sometimes he would sit on the edge of Sonny's bed at night and tell him stories of the days when he loaded and unloaded freight from railroad cars. Only a madman would spit in his face. That was the best Sonny could do to reconcile something so outrageous. The man in the chair had to be crazy. Thinking that way made Sonny calmer. For a time he had been frightened because he didn't know how to make sense of what he'd seen. But then he watched his father as once again he knelt to speak to the man, and in his posture he recognized the steady, reasonable manner that he employed when he was serious, when there was something important that Sonny was to understand. It made him feel better to think that the man was crazy, and his father was talking to him, trying to reason with him. He felt sure that at any moment the man would nod, and his father would have him turned loose, and whatever it was that was wrong would be solved, since that was obviously why they had called his father in the first place, to fix something, to solve a problem. Everybody in the neighborhood knew his father solved problems. Everybody knew that about him. Sonny watched the scene playing out below him and waited for his father to make things right. Instead, the man began to struggle in his chair, his face enraged. He looked like an animal trying to break its restraints, and then he cocked his head and again he spit at Sonny's father. The spit full of blood so that it looked like he somehow managed to do some damage, but it was his own blood. Sonny'd seen the bloody spit shoot out of the man's mouth. He'd seen it splatter on his father's face. What happened next is the last of what Sonny remembered about that night. It was one of those memories not unusual in childhood, that are strange and mysterious at the time, but then get cleared up with experience. At the time, Sonny was perplexed. His father stood and wiped the spit from his face, and then he looked at the man before he turned his back on him and walked away, but only a few feet to the back door, where he stood motionless, while behind him, Uncle Sal pulled, of all things, a pillowcase out of his jacket pocket. Uncle Sal was the tallest of the men, but he walked with a stoop, his long arms dangling at his sides as if he didn't know what to do with them. A pillowcase. Sonny said the words out loud in a whisper. Uncle Sal went behind the chair and pulled the pillowcase over the man's head. Uncle Peter picked up the crowbar and swung it. And then whatever happened after that was a blur. A few things Sonny remembered clearly. Uncle Sal pulling a white pillowcase over the man's head, Uncle Peter swinging the crowbar, the white pillowcase turning red, bright red, and his two uncles bent over the man in the chair doing stuff, untying the cords. Beyond that, he couldn't remember a thing. He must have gone home. He must have gotten back in his bed. He didn't remember any of it, though, not a thing. Everything up to the pillowcase was pretty clear, and then after that, it got fuzzy before the memory disappeared altogether. For the longest time, Sonny didn't know what he had witnessed. It took him years to put all the pieces together. Tom stepped around Kelly and closed the curtains. "Come on, sweetheart," he said. "What do you want to do that for?" "Do what?" Kelly said. "Stand in front of the window like that." "Why? Worried somebody might see you here with me, Tom." Kelly put a hand on her hip and then let it drop in a gesture of resignation. She continued pacing the room, her eyes on the floor one moment, on the walls the next. She seemed unaware of Tom, her thoughts elsewhere. Tom said, "Kelly, listen, I just started college a few weeks ago, and if I don't get back—" "Oh, don't whimper," Kelly said, "for God's sake." "I'm not whimpering," Tom said. "I'm trying to explain." Kelly stopped pacing. "I know," she said. "You're a baby. I knew that when I picked you up. How old are you, anyways? 18, 19? 18, Tom said. "All I'm saying is that I have to get back to the dorms. If I'm not there in the morning, it'll be noticed." Kelly tugged at her ear and stared at Tom. They were both quiet, watching each other. Tom wondered what Kelly was seeing. He'd been wondering about that ever since she'd sauntered over to his table at Duke's Joint and asked him to dance, in a voice so sexy it was as if she were asking him to sleep with her. He wondered it again when she invited him after a few dances and a single drink to take her home. They hadn't talked about much. Tom told her he went to school at NYU. She told him she was currently unemployed and that she came from a big family, but she wasn't getting on with them. She wanted to be in the movies. She'd been wearing a long blue dress that hugged her body from her calves to her breasts, where the neckline was cut low, and the white of her skin flared in contrast to the satiny fabric. Tom told her he didn't have a car, that he was there with friends. She told him that wasn't a problem. She had a car. And he didn't bother to ask how an unemployed girl from a big family has a car of her own. He thought maybe it wasn't her car, and then when she drove them down to Hell's Kitchen, he didn't tell her that he'd grown up a dozen blocks from where she parked on 11th. When he saw her place, he knew the car wasn't hers. But he didn't have time to ask questions before they were in bed and his thoughts were elsewhere. The events of the night had proceeded rapidly and in a way that was foreign to him, and now he was thinking hard as he watched her. Her manner seemed to be shifting by the second. First the seductress, and then the vulnerable girl who didn't want him to leave, and now a toughness was coming over her, something angry. As she watched him, her jaw tightened, her lips pressed together. Something in Tom was shifting too. He was preparing himself for whatever she might say or do, preparing an argument, preparing a response. "So what are you, anyway?" Kelly said. She backed up to a counter beside a white porcelain sink. She lifted herself onto it and crossed her legs. "Some kind of Irish-Italian mutt?" Tom found his sweater where it was hanging on the bed rail. He draped it over his back and tied the sleeves around his neck. "I'm German-Irish," he said. "What makes you say Italian?" Kelly found a pack of wings in a cupboard behind her, opened it, and lit up. "Because I know who you are," she said. She paused dramatically as if she were acting. "You're Tom Hagen. You're Vito Corleone's adopted son." She took a long drag on her cigarette. Behind the veil of smoke, her eyes glittered with a hard-to-read mix of happiness and anger. Tom looked around, noting carefully what he saw, which was nothing more than a cheap boarding house room, not even an apartment, with a sink and cupboard by the door on one end and a cot-sized bed on the other. The floor was a mess of magazines and pop bottles, clothes and candy bar wrappers, empty packs of wings and Chesterfields. The clothes were far too expensive for the surroundings. In one corner he noticed a silk blouse that had to cost more than her rent. "I'm not adopted," he said. "I grew up with the Corleones, but I was never adopted." "No difference," Kelly said. "So what's that make you? A Mick or a Wop, or some kind of Mick-Wop mix?" Tom sat on the edge of the bed. They were having a conversation now. It felt businesslike. "So you picked me up because you know something about my family, is that right?" "What did you think, kid? It was your looks?" Kelly flicked the ashes from her cigarette into the sink beside her. She ran the water to wash the ashes down the drain. Tom asked, "Why would my family have anything to do with this?" "With what?" she asked, the smile on her face genuine, as if she were finally enjoying herself. "With me taking you back here and screwing you," Tom said. "You didn't screw me, kid. I screwed you." She paused, still grinning, watching him. Tom kicked at a pack of Chesterfields. "Who smokes these?" "I do." "You smoke wings and Chesterfields?" "Wings when I'm buying, otherwise Chesterfields." When Tom didn't say anything right away, she added, "You're getting warmer, though. Keep going." "Okay," Tom said. "So whose car did we drive here in? It's not yours. You don't own a car and still live in a place like this." "There you go, kid," she said. "Now you're asking the right questions." "And who buys you the classy threads?" "Bingo," Kelly said. "Now you got it. My boyfriend buys me the clothes. It's his car. You ought to tell him to put you up in a nicer place than this." Tom looked around as if he were amazed at the tawdriness of the room. "I know." Kelly joined him in appraising the room as if she shared his amazement. "You believe this rat hole? This is where I've got to live." "You ought to talk to him," Tom said. His boyfriend, Sonny, was out of the truck and hustling across 11th as soon as Tom stepped out of the building. Tom reached behind him for the door as if he were trying to duck back into the hallway, while Sonny bore down on him, put an arm around his shoulder, and yanked him onto the sidewalk, pulling him toward the corner. "Hey, idiota," Sonny said. "Tell me one thing, okay, pal? Are you trying to get yourself killed, or are you just a Strons? You know whose girl that is you just did the number on? Do you know where you are?" Sonny's voice got louder with each question, and then he pushed Tom back into the alley. He cocked his fist and gritted his teeth to keep from knocking Tom into a wall. "You don't have any idea the trouble you're in, do you?" He leaned toward Tom as if he might at any moment descend on him. What are you doing with some mixed slut anyway? He threw his hands up and turned a small, tight circle, his eyes to the heavens, as if he were calling to the gods. Cazzo! He shouted. I ought to kick your ass down a goddamn sewer. Sonny, Tom said, please calm down. He straightened out his shirt and arranged the sweater draped over his back. Calm down, Sonny said. Let me ask again. Do you know whose girl you were just screwing? No, I don't, Tom said. Whose girl was I just screwing? You don't know, Sonny said. I don't have any idea, Sonny. Why don't you tell me? Sonny stared at Tom in wonder, and then, as often happened with him, his fury disappeared. He laughed. She's Luca Brazzi's twist, you idiot. You didn't know? Tom said, I had no idea. Who's Luca Brazzi? Who's Luca Brazzi? Sonny repeated. You don't want to know who Luca Brazzi is. Luca's a guy who yanked your arm off and beat you to death with the bloody stump for looking at him the wrong way. I know very tough guys who were scared to death of Luca Brazzi, and you just did the number on his girl. Tom took this information in calmly, as if considering its implications. Okay, he said. So now it's your turn to answer a question. What the hell are you doing here? Sonny said, Come here. He wrapped up Tom in a smothering embrace and backed up to get a good look at his brother. How was she? He waved his hand. Maron, she's a dish. Tom stepped around Sonny. On the street, a sleek roan horse pulled a Pector Bakery wagon beside the railroad tracks. One of the spokes on the wagon's rear wheel cracked and broken. A fat man at the reins cast a bored glance at Tom, and Tom tipped his cap to him before he turned to Sonny again. And why are you dressed like you just spent the night with Dutch Schultz? He fingered the lapels on Sonny's double-breasted suit and patted the rich fabric of the vest. How's a kid works in a garage own a suit like this? Hey, Sonny said, I'm doing the asking. He put his arm around Tom's shoulder again and directed him out to the street. Serious, Tommy, he said. Do you have any idea the kind of trouble you could be in? Tom said, I didn't know she was this Luca Brazzi's girlfriend. She didn't tell me. He gestured up the street. Where are we going? He asked. Back to 10th Avenue? Sonny said, What are you doing hanging out at Juke's joint? How'd you know I was at Juke's joint? Because I was there after you. Well, what are you doing hanging out at Juke's joint? Shut up before I give you a smack. Sonny squeezed Tom's shoulder, letting him know he wasn't really mad at him. I'm not the ones in college supposed to be hitting the books. It's Saturday night, Tom said. Not anymore, Sonny said. It's Sunday morning. Jesus, he added as if he just reminded himself how late it was. I'm tired. Tom wrestled out from under Sonny's arm. He took off his cap, straightened out his hair, and put the cap on again, pulling the brim low on his forehead. His thoughts went back to Kelly pacing through the tiny space of her room, dragging the sheet behind her as if she knew she should cover up but couldn't be bothered. She'd been wearing a scent that he couldn't describe. He squeezed his upper lip, which was something he did when he was thinking hard, and smelled her on his fingers. It was a complex odor, bodily and raw. He was stunned by everything that had happened. It was as if he were living someone else's life. Someone more like Sonny. On 11th, a car rattled up behind a horse-drawn cart. It slowed down briefly as its driver cast a quick glance toward the sidewalk, and then swerved around the cart and drove on. Where are we going? Tom asked. It's late for a stroll. I got a car, Sonny said. You've got a car? It's the garage's. They let me use it. Where the hell's it parked? A few more blocks. Why'd you park way up here if you knew I was... Que cazzo! Sonny opened his arms in a gesture that suggested amazement at Tom's ignorance. Because this is Luca Brazzi's territory, he said. Luca Brazzi and the O'Rourke's and a bunch of crazy mix. So what's that to you? Tom asked. He stepped in front of Sonny. What's it to a kid who works in a garage whose territory this is? Sonny shoved Tom out of his way. Outside, the streets ticked by as Sonny headed downtown. Tom said, You taking me back to the dorms? My place, Sonny said. You can stay with me tonight. He looked over at Tom. You thought about this at all? He said. You got some idea what you're going to do? You mean if this Luca character finds out? Yeah, Sonny said. That's what I mean. Tom watched the streets hurry by. They were passing a line of tenements, the windows mostly dark above the glow of street lamps. How's he going to find out? He said finally. She won't tell him. Tom shook his head, as if dismissing the possibility that Luca could find out. I think she's a little crazy, he said. She was acting crazy all night. Sonny said, You know this ain't all about you, Tom. Luca finds out and comes after you, then Pop's got to go after him, then we got a war. And all 'cause you can't keep your zipper closed. Oh, please, Tom shouted. You're lecturing me about keeping my zipper closed? Sonny knocked the cap off Tom's head. She's not going to tell him, Tom said. There won't be any ramifications. Ramifications, Sonny mocked. How do you know? How do you know she doesn't want to make him jealous? Did you think about that? Maybe she's trying to make him jealous. That's pretty crazy, don't you think? Yeah, Sonny said. But you just said she was crazy. Plus, she's a dame, and dames are all nuts, especially the Irish. A whole bunch of them are lunatics. Tom hesitated, and then spoke as if he had settled the question. I don't think she'll tell him, he said. If she does, I'll have no choice but to go to Pop. That's the difference if Luca kills you or Pop kills you. Tom said, What else can I do? Then he added, the thought just occurring to him, maybe I should get a gun. And what, blow your foot off with it? You got an idea? I don't, Sonny said, grinning. It's been nice knowing you, though, Tom. You've been a good brother to me. He leaned back and filled the car with his laughing. You're funny, Tom said. Look, I'm betting she won't tell him. Yeah, Sonny said, taking pity on him. He knocked the ash off his cigarette, took a drag, and spoke as he exhaled. And if she does, he said, Pop will figure out a way to fix it. You'll be in the doghouse for a while, but he's not letting Luca kill you. After another moment, he added, Of course, her brothers. And then he laughed, his big laugh again. You having a good time? Tom said. Hot shot? Sorry, Sonny said, but this is rich. Mr. Perfect's not so perfect. Mr. Good Boy's got a little bad in him. I'm enjoying this, he said, and he reached over to rough up Tom's hair. Tom pushed his hand away. Mama's worried about you, he said. She found a $50 bill in the pocket of a pair of pants you brought her to wash. Sonny slammed the heel of his hand into the steering wheel. That's where it went. She say anything to Pop? No, not yet, but she's worried about you. What'd she do with the money? Gave it to me. Sonny looked at Tom. Don't worry, Tom said. I've got it. So what's Mama worried about? I'm working. Tell her I saved the money. Come on, Sonny. Mama's not stupid. This is a $50 bill we're talking about. So if she's worried, why don't she ask me? Tom fell back in his seat as if he were tired of even trying to talk to Sonny. He opened his window all the way and let the wind blow across his face. Mama don't ask you, he said, the same way she don't ask Pop why now we own a whole building in the Bronx when we used to live the 6 of us on 10th Avenue in a 2-bedroom apartment. Same reasons why she don't ask him how come everybody that lives in the building happens to work for him, or why there's always 2 guys on the front stoop watching everybody who walks or drives by. Sonny yawned and ran his fingers over a tangle of dark, curly hair that spilled down over his forehead almost to his eyes. Hey, he said, the olive oil business is dangerous. Sonny, Tom said, what are you doing with a $50 bill in your pocket? What are you doing in a double-breasted pinstripe suit looking like a gangster? And why, he asked, moving quickly to shove his hand under Sonny's suit jacket and up toward his shoulder, are you carrying a gun? Hey, Tom, Sonny said, pushing his hand away. Tell me something. You think Mama really believes that Pop's in the olive oil business? Tom didn't answer. He watched Sonny and waited. I got the bean shooter with me, Sonny said, because my brother might have been in trouble and might have needed somebody to get him out of it. Where do you even get a gun? Tom said. What's going on with you, Sonny? Pop will kill you if you're doing what it looks like you're doing. What's wrong with you? Answer my question, Sonny said. I'm serious. You think Mama really believes Pop's in the business of selling olive oil? Pop is in the business of selling olive oil. Why? What business do you think he's in? Sonny glanced at Tom as if to say, don't talk like an idiot. Tom said, I don't know what Mama believes. All I know is she asked me to talk to you about the money. So tell her I saved it up from working at the garage. Are you still working at the garage? Yeah, Sonny said. I'm working. Jesus Christ, Sonny. Tom rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. They were on Canal Street, the sidewalks on either side of them lined with empty vendor stands. Now everything was quiet, but in a few hours the street would be crowded with people in their Sunday finery out for a stroll on a fall afternoon. He said, Sonny, listen to me. Mama spends her whole life worrying about Pop, but about her children, Sonny, she doesn't have 3. Sonny knocked once, opened the front door, and didn't manage to get 2 steps into the chaos before Connie, screaming his name, leapt into his arms. Her bright yellow dress was scuffed and darkened where she must have gone down hard on her knees. Strands of silky dark hair, freed from the constraints of 2 bright red bow-tie barrettes, whipped over her face. Behind Sonny, Tom closed the front door on an autumn breeze that picked up leaves and garbage off Arthur Avenue and swept them down Hughes and past the front steps of the Corleone home, where Fat Bobby Altieri and Johnny LaSala, a couple of ex-boxers from Brooklyn, stood atop the stoop smoking cigarettes and talking about the Giants. Connie wrapped her little girl's skinny arms around Sonny's neck and planted a loud, wet kiss on his cheek. Michael jumped up from the game of checkers he was playing with Paulie Gatto, and Fredo came tearing in from the kitchen, and then everyone in the apartment, and there was a crowd this Sunday afternoon, seemed all at once to recognize Sonny and Tom's arrival as a roar of loud greetings was shouted through the rooms. Upstairs, in a study at the head of a flight of wooden steps, Genco Abandando rose from his seat in a tufted leather chair and closed the door. Looks like Sonny and Tommy just showed up, he said. Since anyone who wasn't deaf would have heard both the boys' names called out a dozen times, the announcement was unnecessary. Vito, in a straight-back chair beside his desk, his black hair slicked back, tapped his fingers on his knees and said, Let's move this along. I want to see the boys. Like I was saying, Clemenza continued, Mariposa's gonna bust a blood vessel. He took a handkerchief out of his jacket pocket and blew his nose. I got a little cold, he said, waving the handkerchief at Vito as if offering proof. Clemenza was a heavy man with a round face and a rapidly retreating hairline. His stout body filled the leather chair beside Genco's. Between them was a table with a bottle of anisette and 2 glasses. Tessio, the 4th man in the room, was standing in front of a window seat that looked out across Hughes Avenue. Emilio sent one of his boys to see me, he said. Clemenza said, Me too. Vito looked surprised. Emilio Barzini thinks we're hijacking his whiskey. No, Genco said. Emilio's smarter than that. Mariposa thinks we're jacking his whiskey, and Emilio thinks maybe we might know who is. Vito ran the back of his fingers along his jaw. How does a man so stupid, he said, meaning Giuseppe Mariposa, rise to such heights? He's got Emilio working for him, Tessio said. That helps. Clemenza added, He's got the Barzini brothers, the Rosato brothers, Tomasino Cinquemani, Frankie Pentangeli, Maron, his capos. Clemenza waved his fingers, meaning Mariposa's capos were tough guys. Vito reached for the glass of yellow Strega on his desk. He took a sip and put the glass down. This man, he said, he's friends with the Chicago outfit. He has the Tattaglia family in his pocket. He's got politicians and business leaders behind him. Vito opened his hands to his friends. Why would I make such a man my enemy by stealing a few dollars from him? Tessio added, "He's personal friends with Capone. They go way back." Clemenza said, "Frank Nitty's running Chicago now." "Nitty thinks he's running Chicago," Jenko said. "Rika's the one calling the shots since Capone's in the big house." Vito sighed loudly, and the three men in front of him were instantly quiet. At 41, Vito still retained much of his youth. His dark hair and muscular chest and arms, his olive skin that remained unmarred by lines and wrinkles. Though roughly the same age as Clemenza and Jenko, Vito looked younger than both, and much younger than Tessio, who had been born looking like an old man. "Jenko," he said, "consigliere, is it possible he's this stupido? Or," Vito punctuated his question with a shrug, "or is he up to something else?" Jenko considered the possibility. A slender man with a nose like a beak, he always looked at least a little nervous. He had a constant case of agita and was forever plopping 2 Alka-Seltzer tablets into a glass of water and drinking it down like a whiskey shooter. "Giuseppe's not too stupid he can't read the writing on the wall," he said. "He knows prohibition's on the way out, and I think this thing with Leconti, I think it's about setting himself up to be the one calling the shots when the Volstead Act's repealed. But we gotta keep—" Vito opened a desk drawer, took out a box of De Nobili cigars, and unwrapped one. To Clemenza, he said, "You agree with Jenko?" Clemenza folded his hands over his belly. "Mariposa's got no respect for us." "He's got no respect for nobody," Tessio said. "To Joe, we're a bunch of fanooks." Clemenza wiggled uncomfortably in his chair and his face flushed slightly. "We're like the Irish hoods he's been putting out of business, small-time nobodies. I don't think he cares if he starts something with us. He's got all the button men and torpedoes he needs." "I don't disagree," Jenko said, and he finished off his anisette. "Mariposa's stupid. He has no respect. With all of this I agree. But his capos are not stupid. They'll see to it he takes care of the Leconti business first. Until that's over, these hijackings are small change, nothing more." Vito lit his cigar and turned to Tessio. Downstairs, one of the women shouted something in Italian and one of the men shouted back, and then the house was filled with laughter. Tessio stubbed out his cigarette in a black ashtray beside him on the window seat. "Joe don't know who's jacking his shipments. He's shaking his fist at us, and then he's going to wait and see what happens." Jenko, on the edge of shouting, said, "Vito, he's sending us a message. If we're stealing from him, we'd better stop. If we're not, we'd better find out who is and put an end to it, for the sake of our own health. His capos know we're not stupid enough to steal a few dollars, but they figure they concentrate on the business with Leconti, and they get us to do this little bit of dirty work for them and take care of this problem. That way they don't have to be bothered, and you can bet it's the Barzinis who figured out to play it this way." He found a cigar in his coat pocket and tore the wrapping off it. "Vito," he said, "listen to your consigliere." Vito was quiet, allowing Jenko time to calm down. "So now we're working for Jumpin' Joe Mariposa." He shrugged. "How is it," he said to all three of them, "that these thieves remain unknown? They've got to be selling this whiskey to someone, no?" "They're selling it to Luca Brasi," Clemenza said. "And he's selling it to speakeasies in Harlem." "So why doesn't Joe find out what he wants to know from this Luca Brasi?" Clemenza and Tessio looked at each other as if hoping the other would speak first. When neither did, Jenko spoke up. "Luca Brasi's a beast. He's huge, strong as 10 men, and crazy. Mariposa's scared of him. Everybody's scared of him." "Il diavolo," Clemenza said. "Vinny Suits in Brooklyn swears he saw Brasi take a bullet point blank in the heart and get up and walk away like nothing happened." "A demon from hell," Vito said and smiled as if amused. "So how come this is the first I'm hearing of such a man?" "He's strictly small time," Jenko said. "He's got a gang of 4 or 5 boys. They pull heists and run a numbers bank they took over from the mix. He's never shown any interest in expanding. Where does he operate? Vito asked. In the Irish neighborhoods around 10th and 11th and up in Harlem, Tessio said. All right, Vito said, and he nodded in a way that indicated the discussion was over. I'll see about this Dimone. Vito, Genco said. Luca Brazzi is not a man you reason with. Vito looked at Genco as if he were looking right through him. Genco flopped back in his chair. Anything else? Vito checked his wristwatch. They're waiting for us to start dinner. I'm starving, Clemenza said, but I can't stay. My wife's got a family coming over, Madre Dio. He slapped his forehead. Genco laughed at this, and even Vito couldn't suppress a grin. Clemenza's wife was as big as him and tougher. Her family was a famous bunch of shouters who loved to argue over everything from baseball to politics. One more thing, Tessio said.